People don't usually die in the Sahara because they get lost. Most die because they think the night is harmless. Every story you've heard about scorching heat means nothing once the darkness arrives. The cold moves quietly, choosing its moments, watching who panics and who prepares. What follows is not a battle, but an unraveling that begins long before anyone feels truly afraid. Tonight you will walk into that silence and learn why survival depends on noticing what others ignore. So before you feel comfortable, take a moment to like the video and subscribe to the channel, only if your heart truly wants to. If you do like it, leave a little comment letting me know what time it is where you are. Now dim the lights. Adjust the pillow to fit your head. Maybe turn on a fan to create a relaxing atmosphere. And let's begin this journey together tonight. If someone arrived in the Sahara expecting nothing but heat, they would be carrying an assumption that collapses quickly once the daylight fades. Most people envision the desert as a place defined by scorching sunlight, shimmering horizons, and temperatures that push the body to the brink of exhaustion. All of that is true, but only for half the cycle. The rest of the truth waits quietly beyond the glow of the sun, hidden beneath miles of sand that shed warmth the moment darkness settles. What seemed overwhelming during the day becomes strangely irrelevant at night, replaced by a kind of cold that does not simply fall on the skin, but seeps inward with a steady, deliberate pace. Daytime heat prepares the mind for suffering, but in a predictable way. Sweat evaporates instantly, the throat becomes dry, and the wind stings with dust. People know how to fear heat. They talk about dehydration, sunstroke, cracked lips, and fatigue. They pack water bottles, hats, and lightweight clothes. They think they understand what awaits them. Because the Sahara by day looks like a hostile landscape stripped of mercy, it becomes easy to believe the danger is visible and straightforward. Yet this belief blinds more travelers than any sandstorm. Heat may dominate the daylight hours, but it does not define the desert. When dusk arrives, light weakens in a way that feels almost rehearsed. Shadows stretch, air thins, and the horizon dulls into muted tones. Within minutes, the warmth begins to fall away. The sand, which had felt like a burning plate beneath the feet, cools so quickly that the shift is startling. The body, still adjusting to the lingering memory of sunlight, cannot reconcile how fast the environment changes. That shock is not loud or dramatic. It is quiet, almost gentle at first, and that softness makes it more dangerous. People often mistake the first wave of cool air as relief. In reality, it is an announcement. The temperature continues dropping until the cold becomes sharp. Not the damp cold of northern winters, not the numbing cold of snowstorms, but a dry and efficient chill that behaves like an invisible hand pressing against the bones. Muscles tighten without being told. Breath grows thinner. The skin that endured scorching heat hours earlier now feels exposed, as if stripped of all protection. The contrast alone overwhelms the body's ability to maintain balance. In the span of a single evening, the desert forces people through two extremes that challenge every physiological response they have. Many enter the Sahara, imagining that nighttime coolness will be refreshing, a brief moment of comfort after the brutal daytime heat. They picture themselves resting on soft dunes, with stars overhead and silence as their companion. But the truth dismantles that picture almost immediately. The cold does not settle. It invades. It draws heat from the body faster than fatigue can compensate. Hands stiffen first, then feet. Breathing grows shallow as the chest tries to conserve energy. Even simple tasks, tying fabric, lifting gear, and striking a match, become strangely difficult. This drop in temperature is not only physical, but psychological. The sudden emptiness of warmth, combined with the vast darkness, creates a sensation of being exposed in all directions. There are no walls, no trees, no structures to hide behind. The desert at night feels endless and indifferent. The human mind, already strained from daytime exhaustion, begins to waver. Thoughts slow. Awareness narrows. Some people describe the feeling as a quiet panic, not loud or frantic, but a steady awareness that the cold is tightening around them. And then there is the silence. During the day, the wind carries sound, grains of sand, shifting distant movements, the faint hum of heat. At night, that sound vanishes. The desert becomes still in a way that feels unnatural. In that stillness, the cold seems louder. Every second becomes a reminder of how quickly warmth drains from the body. A person who believed they were prepared suddenly realizes that their clothing is too thin, their shelter too small, their assumptions too optimistic. The desert does not need violence to harm. Its dangers arrive in increments. Travelers who fail to anticipate the cold often underestimate how much energy they have lost during the day. Heat exposure drains strength silently, and by evening most people are dehydrated, hungry, and fatigued. When the temperature drops below freezing, the body must work harder to create heat, but it no longer has the fuel to do so. This combination weakness from heat and shock from cold turns the desert into a test that many do not pass. The belief that surviving the sun is the hardest part is one of the most misleading ideas ever carried into the dunes. What makes the cold even more dangerous is its impersonality. It does not warn, it does not escalate gradually. It simply continues lowering degree by degree while the stars brighten and the sand turns hard beneath the feet. The environment offers no shelter unless one has prepared intentionally. A person wrapped in thin cloths will feel the cold creeping into every fold. A small fire, if there is one at all, will flicker weakly unless tended constantly. Even breathing feels costly. The desert at night does not attack, it erases. Those who have lived in the Sahara for generations understand this duality intimately. They wrap their bodies in layers, cover their heads, protect their necks, and avoid lingering in open dunes. Travelers, however, often step into this realm with expectations shaped by postcards and stories. They come for the heat, they forget the night, and the night, being predictable in its cruelty, does not forget them. The first glimpse of this cold truth reveals that the desert is more than a furnace. It is a place that shifts its danger without hesitation. What comes after this realization belongs to those who learn to breathe within the freezing air. And somewhere in that quiet darkness, another challenge waits without announcing itself. Night in the Sahara strips away warmth with an efficiency that feels almost unnatural. The transition from blistering heat to a piercing chill is not simply a result of darkness. It is the product of an environment built to release heat as quickly as it receives it. The desert has no moisture to cushion the fall in temperature, no humidity to trap the warmth radiating from the ground, and no barrier to slow the escape of energy into the open sky. Everything that burns under the sun becomes exposed and unprotected once the light fades. The desert does not cool gently, it collapses into cold. The absence of moisture is the first and most decisive factor. In places where air carries water vapor, warmth lingers held by the invisible weight of humidity. But in the Sahara, the air is stripped bare. It holds nothing that could retain heat, and so it surrenders everything it has the moment the sun disappears. The sky becomes a vast outlet through which the heat of the day escapes. Warmth rises and evaporates into a night that offers no resistance. It happens silently, without wind or warning. The body feels it before the mind understands it. Below, the sand behaves like a surface designed to betray those who trust it. During the day, it absorbs heat relentlessly, becoming hot enough to burn skin through thin fabric. Yet the same sand loses that heat with astonishing speed. Its grains do not hold warmth the way soil or rock might. They release it instantly, leaving behind a ground that cools faster than the air around it. Standing on it after sundown feels like standing on the memory of heat, rather than heat itself. As if the desert is unwilling to share anything it absorbed during the day. The speed of this loss is not gradual. It is abrupt, a kind of environmental whiplash. One moment, the air is tolerable, even pleasant after sunset, and the next, it is cutting through the layers of clothing with a precision that feels personal. Those expecting a mild drop in temperature soon realize that the desert deals in extremes, not in transitions. The cold does not creep forward. It arrives fully formed. Above the sky becomes a second source of cold. Without clouds, there is no insulation, no barrier to reflect warmth to the earth. Heat radiates upward endlessly, lost into the emptiness. Clouds would have acted like a blanket, trapping some energy close to the surface, but the Sahara rarely allows such protection. The night sky, magnificent in its clarity, becomes a conduit for heat to escape. The stars appear brilliant and near, precisely because nothing stands between the ground and the depths beyond. And that same emptiness is what makes the cold unforgiving. Vegetation could have offered some shelter, holding warmth within trunks, leaves, and branches, but the desert provides none. No trees to break the wind, no shrubs to absorb and release warmth slowly, no cover to create pockets of still air. The landscape is open in all directions, a bare expanse that offers nothing to cling to. Every breeze, no matter how soft, becomes an agent of cooling. With no obstacles to slow it, the wind moves freely, carrying away whatever heat the body manages to produce. Travelers often underestimate how quickly the desert becomes hostile. They imagine cold spreading from the ground alone, but in the Sahara, cold drops from every direction beneath, above, and across the horizon. The body is caught between these forces, losing heat faster than it can generate it. Even thick clothing struggles to compensate. Fabric insulates only when it traps warm air, but in a place so devoid of moisture, the air itself becomes too thin and dry to hold warmth. The cold slips into every gap, collecting in sleeves, gloves, and folds of cloth. The psychological impact is just as immediate. There is a kind of disbelief that accompanies the first wave of night cold. The memory of heat is still vivid, the burning sand, the shimmering dunes, the heavy dryness of daylight. To feel that replaced by freezing air in such a short time creates a sense of displacement. The mind tries to reconcile two environments that seem impossible to belong to the same place. The desert's silence deepens this confusion. There is no crackling frost, no howling winds, no visible sign of dropping temperature. Only the body reacts shivering in a landscape that remains visually unchanged. This shock is not merely discomfort, it weakens judgment. When warmth disappears so quickly, people waste precious moments trying to adjust, trying to understand what is happening instead of acting. They hesitate to add layers, to prepare shelter, to gather fuel. They assume the chill will stabilize. Instead, the cold worsens with each passing hour. By the time they realize how low the temperature has fallen, their bodies have already surrendered too much energy. Experienced desert dwellers know this pattern well. They move quickly at sundown, securing layers, adjusting head coverings, and preparing fires long before the cold becomes noticeable. They do not wait for the air to change. They assume it will. Their knowledge is not instinctual, but inherited a survival wisdom passed down in places where hesitation has consequences. To outsiders, the transition feels like betrayal. How can a land so hot become so cold? How can a place defined by sunburns and dehydration also inflict chills deep enough to numb the hands and slow the breath? Yet this contradiction is the essence of the Sahara. It operates on extremes, not on balance. Those who misunderstand this duality face a night that punishes their assumptions without hesitation. The truth behind the desert's freezing nights reveals a landscape designed to shed warmth without mercy. Every element of its environment works toward that single outcome. And somewhere within this loss of heat lies another struggle that travelers rarely anticipate. Nightfall in the Sahara does not announce itself with danger. It arrives quietly, too quietly for those who have only known cold through winters softened by walls, roofs, or city air. Travelers often enter the desert believing that the hardships they must prepare for belong to the daytime. They carry sunscreen hats, light clothing, and extra water, convinced that the sun is the single threat capable of breaking them. But as the heat collapses and the cold gains ground, the unprepared begin to understand that the first night is not simply uncomfortable. It is a test of whether their assumptions can withstand reality. Many arrive with clothing suited for vacations, not survival. Thin shirts, open sandals, light scarves, items chosen for relief from the sun, not protection from the cold. These garments fail almost immediately. When the temperature drops, warmth leaves the body faster than the traveler can respond. Muscles tighten in reflex, trying to conserve energy, but the cold seeps through every gap of exposed skin. Within an hour, shivering begins. Not the mild tremor of a chilly evening, but a deep, involuntary shaking that spreads from the chest outward as if the body is trying to warn itself of what is coming. Sleep becomes impossible. The sand beneath hardens, withdrawing every bit of warmth it briefly held. Breath turns shallow, then uneven. The cold does not allow rest. It demands vigilance. A person may lie down, hoping to escape exhaustion, only to feel the cold pull at their energy with each passing minute. The mind grows restless, calculations blur, and simple decisions begin to feel strangely heavy. Fatigue mixes with fear in a way that makes even the strongest personalities feel exposed. This is when the true nature of the Sahara reveals itself. Not as a dramatic storm or a violent force, but as an environment where small discomforts escalate quickly. A slight chill becomes a tremor becomes confusion becomes a loss of coordination. The rhythms of the human body begin to slip out of sync with the environment. Energy drains faster than a person realizes, because the cold in such a dry place does not feel wet or icy. It feels hollow, like a vacuum pulling warmth out rather than pressing cold in. Some travelers light a fire, but few understand how much tending it requires. The wind is unpredictable. One gust can scatter embers, leaving only a faint glow. Without constant care, the temperature around the fire becomes meaningless. A weak flame does not warm the air, it merely creates an illusion of comfort. Those who sit too far away feel nothing. Those who sit too close risk burning their last reserves of energy while the rest of their body remains cold. Fire in the desert is not a guarantee. It is a tool that must be controlled, and many who rely on it blindly discover its limits too late. Others try to walk to stay warm, but movement in the sand is draining. Steps sink, heels slip, and the uneven terrain steals strength more efficiently than any mountain path. What begins as an attempt to generate heat becomes a rapid loss of stamina. The desert floor absorbs their effort and gives back nothing. When they stop walking, the cold returns like a reprimand. As hours pass, the signs of hypothermia appear in ways that are easy to ignore at first. Fingers grow stiff, then clumsy. Judgment slows. A person may believe they are thinking clearly while making choices that place them in greater danger. The brain, deprived of warmth, misinterprets signals. Some feel drowsy, mistaking the sensation for fatigue rather than the body shutting down. Others feel irrationally confident, refusing help or removing layers of clothing because the cold has numbed their understanding of temperature. By the time the desert reaches its lowest point, when breath turns visible and the sky becomes painfully sharp with stars, those who are unprepared have already passed the threshold where self-correction becomes difficult. The cold does not kill violently. It weakens people until they cannot protect themselves from the next wave of chill. They sit down, intending to rest for a moment, and never rise again. Death in the desert night often looks like sleep, which is why so many underestimate it. The silence contributes to the danger. In forests or cities, cold is accompanied by sound, wind cracking, ice rustling leaves, and mechanical noise. Noise makes people alert, but in the Sahara, the quiet is absolute. There is no reminder to stay awake, no disturbance to shake off the creeping numbness. A person can drift into stillness without realizing they have crossed the line between rest and collapse. The environment offers no resistance. It simply lets the cold do its work. To survive the first night is to confront a truth that rarely appears in travel guides. The Sahara does not test people with overwhelming aggression. It tests them with quiet precision. It takes their assumptions, strips them away, and leaves them face to face with a version of themselves that must react quickly or not at all. Many fail because they trust what they saw during the day and forget that night obeys its own rules. By dawn, only those who understood the warning signs, or those who were able to adapt in time, remain fully conscious. The harsh reality of the first night exposes how easily unprepared travelers are undone by the cold they never believed possible. What happens afterward depends on how well they read the silent signals around them. Somewhere beyond that fragile edge of survival waits a truth that is far more unsettling than the night itself. Clothing in the Sahara is not a matter of comfort, but a form of defense, one that determines whether the body can hold the small amount of warmth it manages to create during the night. People who arrive from temperate climates often assume that thick garments are the answer, as though a single heavy layer could shield them from the desert's cold. This assumption fails almost immediately. In a place where temperatures shift violently between day and night, survival comes from layering thin, breathable fabrics stacked carefully to trap warm air without suffocating the skin. The desert rewards those who understand its contradictions and punishes those who trust their instincts more than its reality. A single, thick layer offers the illusion of protection, not the substance of it. Heavy clothing traps sweat from the day, creating pockets of moisture that cool rapidly after sunset. Dampness becomes a silent threat in a landscape already determined to pull heat away. Thin layers, by contrast, allow the body to adjust gradually. Each layer forms a boundary, slowing the escape of warmth while preventing the buildup of moisture. Travelers who follow this principle tend to remain alert longer. Those who ignore it grow cold from within. Wool and other insulating fibers become essential not because they create heat, but because they anchor what little warmth the body produces. In such dry air, synthetic materials fail quickly. They cling to the skin but do nothing to retain energy. Wool behaves differently. It creates a cushion of warm air that stays in place. The fabric continues to insulate even if it becomes slightly damp, a rare advantage in a place where temperature swings cannot be predicted. It is a material that understands hardship shaped by nature to handle more than one extreme. But clothing is not only about the torso or limbs. The desert takes heat from the head, the ears, and the neck, long before it claims the rest of the body. Covering these areas is not a matter of style, but a necessity. A scarf wrapped around the head may seem decorative to outsiders, but to those who have lived in the Sahara, it is a shield. It keeps cold air from entering the lungs too quickly, slows the chilling of blood vessels near the surface, and prevents the wind from stripping warmth in seconds. The same fabric worn during the day, to guard against the sun, becomes at night the only barrier between breath and frost. Wind intensifies this need. The Sahara's nighttime wind is neither loud nor dramatic, but it works with precision. It slips through the smallest gaps in clothing, enters at the wrists, the ankles, the sides of the neck, and drains heat with the ease of a practiced thief. Even a small breeze can undo the efforts of a carefully layered outfit if the head or neck remains exposed. This is why desert dwellers learn early to cover themselves fully, leaving no part vulnerable to the night. Travelers often struggle with this concept, believing that covering too much will make them uncomfortable. They associate heavy clothing with heat rather than insulation. Many cling to the memory of the sun from earlier in the day, assuming the warmth will linger. But once the temperature drops, the body loses heat too quickly for recovery. Clothing that felt excessive at sunset becomes insufficient within an hour. Those who fail to adjust in time find themselves shivering before they understand what they have done wrong. The wrong choice in clothing has consequences that extend beyond discomfort. Poor insulation forces the body to burn energy faster, increasing fatigue at a time when strength is already limited. When the body begins to shake violently in an attempt to generate heat, the mind grows foggy. Decision-making becomes slow, fragmented. Someone who feels only slightly cold at dusk may descend into a dangerous state before midnight. The desert does not provide clear warnings. It simply allows the cold to do its work. Meanwhile, experienced nomads adjust their clothing automatically. They have learned to add layers as the sun begins to lower, not when the first chill arrives. They know that warmth is easier to preserve than to reclaim, and that losing even a small amount of heat can be costly. Their garments, often misunderstood by outsiders as symbols of tradition alone, are designed to combat both extremes of the desert, heat by day and cold by night. What appears simple is actually the product of generations of adaptation. Clothing then becomes more than a barrier between the body and the environment. It becomes a statement of understanding. The desert does not forgive assumptions. Those who dress for the heat but not the cold discover that nature cares little for human expectations. The layers one chooses at dusk determine the clarity of thought during the night, the strength of movement, the ability to react, and ultimately the chances of seeing the next sunrise. The first night teaches this lesson with unmistakable clarity. Clothing is not optional. It is not decoration. It is the only protection available in a landscape that strips away comfort without hesitation. Even those who arrive with high-quality gear must learn to use it correctly. A misplaced layer, a loose scarf, an exposed patch of skin, all become vulnerabilities in an environment that wastes no time exploiting them. The cold of the Sahara reveals how clothing determines the thin boundary between discomfort and danger. What comes afterward depends on how well the layers stand against the night's quiet pressure. Within that narrow space of survival lies a deeper struggle that exposes the limits of even the best prepared travelers. To understand how the Sahara is endured rather than merely survived, one must look at the people who have called it home for generations. The Tuareg, unlike travelers who step into the desert, carrying assumptions shaped by distant landscapes, live according to the rhythms of a place that offers no forgiveness. Their clothing, their movements, even their silences are formed by centuries of adaptation. Nothing they do is accidental. Every layer, every fold of fabric, and every gesture reflects a deep understanding of how the desert works, how it burns, how it cools, and how it takes from those who do not respect its patterns. Their iconic long scarves, often misunderstood by outsiders as decorative or ceremonial, serve functions far more practical and essential. Wrapped around the head across the face and down the neck, these lengths of cloth regulate temperature with remarkable efficiency. By day, the fabric shields them from the heat, slowing dehydration and preventing the sun from drawing moisture from their skin. At night, the same cloth becomes insulation, trapping warm air close to the body and preventing the cold wind from stealing it away. It is not simply a garment but a tool, one shaped by necessity rather than fashion. The layering of their clothing follows the same principle. Their garments appear loose and flowing, but each piece is designed to create pockets of air, small reservoirs of warmth that remain stable even as the temperature swings violently. What looks simple to an outsider is in reality a complex system that responds to the environment with subtle precision. The Tuareg learned long ago that the desert does not reward those who dress for its heat alone. It demands preparation for both extremes, and their clothing is a direct answer to that demand. Color plays a role as well. Deep blues and other darker shades absorb heat during the day, offsetting the chill that comes with sudden shadows or unexpected winds. At night, these same colors help retain warmth, acting like a lightweight shield against the loss of temperature. To someone unfamiliar with desert life, such choices might seem impractical or even uncomfortable, but they are based on generations of observation. The desert does not teach quickly, it teaches thoroughly. Their understanding of temperature is not limited to clothing. It extends to timing, movement, and the way they navigate the landscape. They rest during the hottest hours, conserving energy for times when the body can afford to work without collapsing. They travel when the sun is lower, mapping routes that minimize exposure to extremes. When the night begins, they adjust their layers without hesitation, long before the cold becomes noticeable. This anticipation is part of their survival. They do not wait for discomfort to force action. They act to prevent the discomfort from beginning. Generational knowledge shapes every decision. The Tuareg do not need to test the sand with their hands to know how much heat it retains. They do not need to look at the sky to judge how quickly warmth will escape through its clarity. Experience has taught them to read the desert through details invisible to outsiders. The feel of the air at sunset, the weight of the wind across the dunes, the density of shadows forming in the distance. These signals tell them when to prepare for cold, when to shield themselves, and when to expect a night far more severe than the one before it. This inheritance of knowledge creates a divide between those who belong to the desert and those who only pass through it. Travelers often imitate the clothing of the Tuareg, believing that wearing similar garments will offer the same protection. But imitation without understanding is fragile. A scarf wrapped incorrectly will loosen in the wind. Layers added too late will trap cold rather than warmth. The garments work for the Tuareg because they are used with precision and intention, not because of their material alone. Their preparation extends beyond personal clothing. The way they arrange shelters, choose resting sites, and position themselves against the wind contributes to their survival. They know which depressions in the sand hold warmth a little longer, which rocky outcrops slow the loss of heat, and which directions the wind will most likely travel after dark. Even the way they sit or sleep is shaped by centuries of refinement, shoulders slightly hunched to retain warmth, feet tucked in heads, covered completely. These details matter in a place where temperature does not simply drop, it falls. What stands out most is the calmness with which they approach the cold. There is no surprise in their movements, no hesitation. The first night in the desert, which terrifies travelers and exposes their inexperience, is merely routine for them. They have learned that the desert does not negotiate, it offers no second chances. Their clothing, their timing, and their awareness form a single response, a quiet acceptance of the environment's demands. To outsiders, this life may appear harsh, but to the Tuareg, it is simply the world as it is. Their adaptations allow them to move through the desert, not as victims of its extremes, but as participants in its rhythms. They do not fight the heat or the cold, they prepare for both. Their resilience comes from the simple understanding that survival in the Sahara is not achieved through strength alone, but through knowledge applied with precision. The ways of the desert's native people reveal that survival is built on generations of observation and adjustment rather than improvisation. What follows this understanding depends on how others learn to read the land they walk upon. Within that silent dialogue between human and environment lies the next challenge that travelers rarely anticipate. Shelter in the Sahara is not merely a question of covering, but of understanding how the night air behaves once the heat has vanished. The cold that settles after sunset is harsh enough on its own, but the wind, thin, dry, and often unpredictable, turns discomfort into danger with brutal efficiency. It does not howl or rage the way winter winds do in colder regions. Instead, it moves quietly across the dunes, stripping warmth from the skin in steady threads that feel almost deliberate. A person exposed to it for even a short time can find themselves losing body heat far faster than they expect, long before fatigue allows them to register what is happening. The open desert offers no protection from this wind. With no trees to break its path and no structures to divert its course, it travels unhindered, sweeping over dunes and valleys alike. It presses against clothing, slips beneath layers, and drains warmth from the chest and limbs as if drawing from a well. The air seems almost weightless, yet its effect is relentless. Those who sit on high dunes or flat terrain quickly discover that elevation and open ground magnify the wind's reach. The cold sharpens in these places, attacking the body from all sides. This is why shelter must be chosen with intention, not convenience. A thick, well-secured tent can make the difference between preserving enough warmth to endure the night and waking at dawn in a state of dangerous exhaustion. The fabric must be dense enough to resist the wind's pressure, but flexible enough to hold its shape without tearing. When pitched correctly, the tent becomes a barrier, not a perfect one, but a necessary one against the thin currents of air that cut through the desert's silence. Inside, the temperature does not rise dramatically, but it drops more slowly, buying time that the body desperately needs. The shape and placement of the tent matter as much as its material. A tent set on open ground becomes a target for the wind shaking with every gust, until warmth escapes through its seams. A tent placed near a slight depression or behind a natural mound fares better. These subtle dips in the landscape are easily overlooked by outsiders, yet they influence the direction and intensity of the wind. Nestled within such contours, the shelter absorbs less direct force, allowing the air inside to remain more stable. Even a few degrees of retained warmth can determine whether the mind stays sharp enough to make sound decisions in the hours before dawn. Travelers inexperienced with desert nights often misunderstand these depressions. To them, the lower ground appears colder simply because it lacks the wide views of elevated dunes. But the desert does not operate according to intuition. Heat escapes upward, and wind cuts across exposed peaks. The valleys and hollows, though not warm, offer a quieter environment, where the air does not accelerate with the same violence. Here, the cold is still severe, but it is consistent, not sharpened by passing gusts. Those who position themselves correctly sleep longer, conserve more energy, and face the morning with a steadier mind. The wind's effect is most evident when one observes how quickly warmth disappears from exposed surfaces. Blankets flutter, loose clothing becomes chilled, and skin tightens as if recoiling. A person attempting to rest without shelter will feel the ground's cold pressing upward while the wind drains heat from above. The combination destabilizes the body's attempts to regulate itself. Even a fire, though comforting, cannot compensate when the wind carries away its heat as fast as it is produced. Nomads understand this better than anyone. They do not choose resting places at random. They study the contours of the sand, the direction of the fading light, and the subtle movements of the wind just after sunset. Their shelters are pitched low and tight, anchored deep to prevent shifting. They face openings away from the prevailing air currents. Inside, they create small pockets where warmth from bodies and blankets can accumulate. These practices, refined across generations, acknowledge a simple truth: the desert offers no shelter unless one creates it deliberately. For those unaccustomed to this environment, the first attempt at finding or building shelter often reveals their inexperience. They may choose high ground for the sake of visibility, only to spend the night shivering. They may pitch a tent loosely, mistaking stillness at dusk for calmness throughout the night. Or they may underestimate how quickly the wind rises once darkness deepens. By the time they realize their mistake, their hands may already be too numb to correct it. The desert's cold is not a sudden blow, but a gradual pressure. Shelter slows that pressure, giving the body enough time to adapt. Without it, even strong travelers find themselves drained. Fatigue settles in, thoughts scatter, and the hours with a heaviness that feels almost unreal. The landscape remains beautiful with sharp stars, clear skies, and silent dunes. But beauty in the desert does not offer safety. Shelter does. To find a place protected from the wind is to acknowledge that survival here depends less on resisting the environment and more on understanding its movements. The Sahara punishes those who treat it as static. Wind patterns shift, temperatures drop, and shapes of dunes change subtly in the dark. Those who adapt to these patterns stand a chance of enduring the night with clarity intact. Those who ignore them face a long and unforgiving descent into cold. The search for shelter reveals how the desert's most subtle movements can decide a traveler's fate. What unfolds beyond this small refuge depends on how well one anticipates the night's hidden threats. Deep in those hours of stillness lies another challenge that tests more than physical endurance. Fire in the Sahara is never just a source of warmth. It is a fragile lifeline that stands between the human body and a landscape designed to take heat away. When darkness settles and the cold begins its steady work, the presence of a flame becomes the only element capable of slowing the night's progression. In a place where warmth escapes into the sky and wind strips heat from exposed skin, fire becomes the closest thing to stability. Without it, even the strongest layers of clothing offer only temporary resistance, and shelter alone cannot compensate for the constant loss of energy. The cold is not the only threat. The desert holds creatures that move silently in the night, drawn not out of malice, but survival of their own. Fire creates a boundary, an imperfect one, but still enough to signal that a living presence occupies the space. The glow, the heat, and the shifting shadows discourage animals from approaching too closely. It is not fear that keeps them away, but preference. Warmth and light disrupt the patterns of their nocturnal movements. To spend a night without fire is to invite the desert's lesser-known inhabitants to wander near. Though most travelers do not understand this until after they feel the subtle unease of being watched in the dark. Sourcing material for fire in such an environment demands a different understanding. There is no abundance of wood as in temperate regions. The desert offers only what it has: dry branches scattered sparsely, clumps of thorny brush, or remnants of older campsites. More commonly, the fuel comes from dried animal droppings, which burn slowly and produce enough heat to sustain a small flame. These materials are not glamorous, nor do they burn with the satisfying crackle of forest wood, but they serve their purpose. The desert does not reward those who seek comfort, it rewards those who accept practicality. Lighting a fire requires attention to airflow. Too much wind, and the initial spark dies. Too little movement, and the flame suffocates beneath its own smoke. The delicate balance becomes a test of patience. Even those experienced with the outdoors must adapt their methods. The dryness of the Sahara means that sparks ignite easily, but maintaining a flame is another matter. The fire must be shielded from sudden gusts, fed with fuel in small amounts, and watched constantly. It is not a task one completes and forgets. It is a responsibility that lasts until dawn. Once established, the fire serves as a point of orientation. In the vast emptiness of the night, it anchors the mind, interrupting the disorientation that often comes with cold and darkness. People gather close hands, extended eyes, half-focused as warmth bleeds into their skin. Conversation, if any, remains muted. Fire in the desert is not a social centerpiece. It is survival, and the body treats it as such. Even the smallest flame provides a psychological steadiness, a reminder that not everything in the night belongs to the void. Yet fire is deceptive in its comfort. Sitting too close and clothing absorbs more heat than it can retain, leaving the body vulnerable when one steps away. Sit too far, and the warmth becomes meaningless. Each adjustment of distance becomes its own calculation. Travelers who have never spent a night in the Sahara often underestimate this, believing that any fire is enough. But the desert teaches otherwise. A flame must be tended with discipline. Without it, the cold returns with an unrelenting precision, claiming the warmth the fire briefly offered. Maintaining the flame throughout the night is an obligation that allows for no lapse in attention. Fuel must be added periodically positioned, so the fire continues, burning evenly. The wind shifts, sometimes subtly, and the fire must shift with it. One careless moment, one assumption that the flame is stable, can lead to a sudden collapse of heat. In the desert, rebuilding a fire at its lowest point becomes almost impossible for hands that have already grown numb. The flame must never be allowed to die low enough that the cold overtakes the person tending it. Nomads approach fire with a ritualistic efficiency. They do not waste motion. They know the exact amount of fuel needed, the ideal shape of the flame, and the right angle to shield it from wind. They do not sit mesmerized by it the way travelers do. For them, fire is a practiced tool, familiar, but never underestimated. Their movements reflect a lifetime spent balancing necessity against the desert's indifference. For the inexperienced, the first night reveals how dependent they are on this small circle of heat. Away from the flame, darkness feels heavier. The sand becomes colder, thoughts slow. Even returning to the fire after a brief walk feels like coming back from a distance far larger than the steps taken. Fire shrinks the world into a small, manageable radius. Outside it, the desert remains as vast and unforgiving as ever. The flame's importance becomes undeniable when one considers how fragile warmth is here. Fire is not a luxury, it is an anchor that holds the body together. Without it, the night strips away comfort, clarity, and strength. With it, survival becomes possible, though never guaranteed. Fire buys time, nothing more. The desert continues its work beyond the circle of light, waiting for the slightest lapse in attention. The struggle to keep a fire alive reveals how the desert forces people to guard their warmth with unbroken vigilance. What comes after this fragile glow fades depends on choices made in the cold's tightening grip. Beneath that dim boundary of light lies a truth that few travelers recognize until it is too late. A night in the Sahara without fire is not simply a cold experience. It is a quiet dismantling of the spirit. The darkness is absolute, a void that stretches beyond what the eyes can understand, and in that void, the mind begins to falter long before the body does. Without a flame to anchor attention and offer warmth, the desert becomes a landscape that erodes psychological resilience. Even those who consider themselves strong quickly discover that cold and darkness, when combined, have a way of loosening the threads that hold thoughts together. The chill is sharper in the absence of fire. The body loses heat steadily, each breath escaping into the air without being replaced. Muscles tighten, then tremble, then grow heavy. The desert does not forgive stillness. It treats inactivity as surrender. The air, already dry and thin, slips into clothing and strips warmth with a precision that feels surgical. At 4 degrees Celsius, the process accelerates. The body tries to generate heat through shivering, but the effort consumes energy faster than food or rest can restore it. Soon, fingers numb, breathing shallows, and the cold settles into the joints as if claiming territory. But it is the darkness that completes the difficulty. Without the small circle of light that fire provides, depth perception collapses. Shapes dissolve. The horizon becomes meaningless. A person can no longer judge distance or direction. Even familiar objects appear unfamiliar. The desert, already vast by day, becomes immeasurable at night. In this emptiness, the mind loses its sense of structure. Thoughts that were orderly before dusk scatter into disjointed impressions. Small anxieties grow into heavy doubts, and the absence of warmth amplifies each fear. The cold does not rush. It proceeds methodically, denying the body the chance to recover. While the temperature hovers below freezing, the wind deepens the effect. Each gust draws out heat faster, leaving the skin exposed to a chill it cannot withstand for long. A person without fire becomes the warmest object in their surroundings, which means the environment steadily pulls heat from them, as naturally as sand absorbs sunlight. This imbalance is not dramatic. It is steady, persistent, and entirely predictable. Travelers who attempt to endure the night without fire often begin with misplaced confidence. They wrap themselves in blankets, huddle beneath layers, or press their bodies close to the ground. These tactics provide temporary relief, but they cannot replace the unique stability that fire offers. Clothing traps heat but does not generate it. Sand retains only what remains from the day, and that warmth vanishes quickly. Without fire, every degree of heat lost is gone for good. The body weakens at a pace that feels strangely quiet, as if slipping into a state that resists recognition. Mental exhaustion arrives soon after. The absence of light removes all points of focus. The mind wanders, searching for something to stabilize itself, but finds nothing. Darkness in the desert is not simply the lack of sight. It is the lack of boundaries. People begin to imagine sounds or movements that do not exist. Every shift of wind becomes a potential threat. Every shadow becomes uncertain. Even the stars, sharp and cold above, offer no comfort. Their clarity highlights how exposed the ground is. Without fire, the night becomes an unbroken expanse that presses mentally as much as physically. The consequences deepen as the hours pass. When the body grows too cold, decision-making slows. A person might delay adjusting their clothing, ignore the need to move, or misunderstand the severity of their condition. Hypothermia does not announce itself with drama. It begins with small lapses, forgetting to close a scarf, failing to tighten a blanket, misjudging the wind's direction. These mistakes accumulate, and once the mind dulls, correcting them becomes increasingly difficult. What makes this danger so profound is its subtlety. Nothing attacks, nothing storms. The desert simply continues existing, and the cold continues working. There are no dramatic shifts, no sudden changes to force awareness. In the absence of fire, the night unfolds with quiet inevitability, and those unprepared for it often do not realize how deep their vulnerability has become until they can no longer stand or think clearly. Nomads understand this deeply. They never allow the flame to die. Their vigilance is not fear, but respect for the environment's consistency. They know that the cold does not need to be violent to be fatal. They move with a kind of disciplined urgency, adding fuel before the flame dims, shielding it from wind, and keeping its glow steady. For them, fire is not warmth alone. It is orientation, protection, and clarity. Without it, even knowledge passed down through generations becomes difficult to use. The difference between a traveler with fire and one without it is the difference between maintaining control and gradually losing autonomy to the desert's rhythms. Fire offers a center point around which survival can be organized. Without it, the night becomes a scattered and disjointed experience, dominated by cold that feels increasingly personal. It is not the temperature itself that defeats people, but the combination of physical weakness and mental unraveling, two forces that the Sahara aligns with unusual precision. The absence of fire reveals how quickly strength dissolves when exposed to cold and darkness without support. What follows this understanding depends on whether travelers recognize the urgency of their fading warmth. Beyond that fragile recognition lies a truth that reshapes how the night is endured. The body's struggle against the cold in the Sahara begins long before the first shiver. By the time night settles over the dunes, the heat of the day has already drained much of a traveler's energy. Muscles fatigued by walking on shifting sand, lungs worn down by dry air, and a mind dulled by hours of exposure all contribute to a vulnerability that the night exploits with precision. Food, often treated as an afterthought, becomes one of the few defenses that remain when temperatures fall and the desert begins its slow extraction of warmth. A meal rich in calories does more than satisfy hunger. It serves as fuel for the body's internal furnace. In the absence of external heat, the body must rely on metabolic energy to stay warm. The process is demanding, requiring a steady supply of nutrients to maintain circulation and preserve clarity of thought. When the stomach is empty, the body's warmth declines rapidly, as if conceding ground to the cold. Travelers who neglect to eat before nightfall often learn quickly that hunger amplifies the chill, making the cold feel sharper and more immediate. The type of food matters just as much as the act of eating. Heavy nutrient-dense meals generate more heat as the body breaks them down. Simple carbohydrates burn too quickly, offering a brief rise in warmth that disappears almost as soon as it is felt. Proteins and fats provide slower, more sustained energy, essential during long hours when the cold chips away steadily at the body's reserves. This is why desert dwellers choose their evening meals carefully, favoring dishes that support endurance rather than comfort. Cold foods, on the other hand, sabotage the body's efforts. Eating something chilled introduces a shock that forces the stomach to work harder, draining energy instead of preserving it. The effect is subtle at first, then becomes more pronounced as temperatures drop further. Even cold water poses a risk. Drinking too much of it lowers core temperature and creates an imbalance that the body must immediately correct. In the Sahara, such a simple misstep can begin a chain reaction that leads to trembling limbs, sluggish thinking, and weakened coordination. Warm drinks offer a rare advantage. A cup of hot herbal tea, simple though it seems, sends heat inward in a way that clothing, shelter, and even fire cannot replicate. The warmth spreads through the chest, loosening the stiffness brought on by dry cold. The herbs themselves do little to fight the temperature, but the act of drinking something heated reinforces the body's efforts to maintain stability. For many travelers, that brief moment of warmth becomes a psychological anchor, a reminder that the cold has not yet gained full control. The timing of the meal plays an equally important role. Eating too early allows the warmth of digestion to fade before the cold reaches its peak. Eating too late risks digestion becoming sluggish in a chilled body, reducing its effectiveness. The ideal window aligns with dusk, when the day's heat begins to retreat, but has not yet vanished entirely. In that short period, food becomes part of the transition from day to night, reinforcing the body before the desert strips away the remaining warmth. Nomads understand this balance intrinsically. They do not eat large meals during the hottest hours because digestion generates heat, which becomes a burden under the sun. Instead, they reserve their most substantial food for the evening, allowing the energy to serve its purpose when the cold arrives. Their choices reflect a disciplined awareness of the desert's demands. They understand that survival hinges not only on protection from external cold, but on feeding the internal warmth the body must generate on its own. Travelers who fail to respect this often find themselves overwhelmed by the cold, despite adequate clothing and shelter. A body without fuel cannot fight back. Shivering, meant to be a defense mechanism, becomes ineffective when energy is scarce. Fingers stiffen, the mind grows foggy, decisions lose their sharpness. The cold becomes not just an external force, but an internal unraveling. Food in this context is not comfort, it is structure. Without it, the body struggles to hold itself together through the long night. The desert magnifies the consequences of every mistake. Skipping a meal in a temperate environment may mean only slight discomfort. In the Sahara, it can mean the difference between enduring the cold and being overtaken by it. Even small misjudgments compound under these extreme conditions. A traveler might think they are too tired to eat, or believe that drinking cold water is harmless. The desert does not punish such choices immediately. It waits until the body reaches its weakest point, then reveals the cost all at once. The act of eating becomes another form of preparation, a quiet ritual that acknowledges the severity of night. It reinforces the body against the coming hours and steadies the mind against the psychological strain of darkness. It is not dramatic, and it does not offer dramatic comfort, but it creates a foundation that allows the body to respond to the cold rather than collapse beneath it. The need for proper nourishment shows how easily the night takes advantage of a weakened body. What unfolds afterward rests on how travelers sustain their strength when warmth becomes scarce. Far beyond the reach of simple hunger lies a struggle that reveals the limits of human endurance. The cold of the Sahara does not fall evenly across the landscape. It settles according to shape, height, and the unseen movements of air that shift through the desert like a silent current. To understand why one place feels harsher than another, one must observe how the land directs the wind, how the sand retains or loses warmth, and how each rise and dip becomes part of the night's quiet architecture. Many travelers assume that cold is simply a matter of temperature, but in the Sahara, the terrain chooses who suffers most. High dunes appear majestic in daylight, the wind carving their ridges into smooth curves that stretch endlessly across the horizon. At night, however, these elevated points become exposed platforms where the cold intensifies without restraint. Wind strikes the crests, first uninterrupted by obstacles, rolling over them with a force that strips warmth from the body faster than the temperature alone suggests. A person standing on such a height finds the chill sharper, almost metallic, as if the air itself has turned against them. Even thick clothing offers little comfort when gusts steal heat faster than the body can replace it. The wind's behavior on dunes is not a dramatic storm, but a constant grinding presence. It moves in waves, sometimes soft enough to lull the mind, then suddenly firm enough to make the cold feel deeper and more personal. Travelers who choose to camp near the tops of dunes often do so for the view, unaware that the desert does not reward such choices. The wind does not make exceptions. It simply continues taking warmth with each passing moment, reducing both comfort and endurance. Lower ground tells a different story. Valleys and shallow depressions between dunes hold what little warmth the desert still retains after sunset. The land itself provides shelter, breaking the wind's momentum and slowing its relentless cooling effect. In these pockets of calm, the night becomes a little more bearable. The sand, still carrying traces of the day's heat, releases it slowly. It is not enough to create comfort, but it softens the intensity of the cold, giving the body a small advantage in its ongoing struggle. These low areas also provide psychological relief. When the wind quiets, the mind steadies. The stillness allows for clearer thinking, which becomes essential when navigating long nights with limited energy. The difference is subtle but meaningful. On high dunes, the cold demands attention relentlessly. In the valleys, the cold negotiates rather than attacks. Those who have spent many nights in the Sahara learn quickly that survival depends as much on choosing the right location as on proper clothing or nourishment. The sand itself plays a deceptive role. During the day, it absorbs heat aggressively, but once the sun disappears, the same sand releases that warmth with startling speed. On exposed dunes, this loss happens quickly, leaving the surface cold long before true night sets in. In sheltered areas, however, the process slows. The heat lingers, giving the ground a faint warmth that the body recognizes instantly. It is not enough to prevent cold entirely, but it is enough to delay its strongest effects. Choosing where to set up camp becomes a quiet calculation that determines how the night will unfold. Some travelers, inexperienced or overly confident, select locations based on convenience or aesthetics. They place their tents where the sand appears smooth or where the view appeals to them. They do not consider how the wind will behave or how the temperature will settle across the landscape. Only after nightfall do they realize that the land they chose offers no protection, and by then moving becomes another burden in the growing cold. Survivors understand that the desert has a logic of its own. They examine the angles of the dunes, the depth of the depressions and the direction of faint breezes before choosing a place to rest. They do not seek beauty but safety. Their campsites are rarely visible from far away, hidden in folds of land, designed not for comfort but for endurance. To them, the desert's terrain is not scenery. It is a partner that must be respected, or a quiet adversary that punishes carelessness. Night reveals mistakes with precision. A tent placed slightly too high becomes a funnel for wind. A sleeping spot chosen too close to a slope may collect cold air that slides down like water. A depression that seemed sheltered in twilight may prove too deep, trapping moisture and making the cold feel damp and invasive. The Sahara does not offer guarantees. It offers choices, each with consequences that unfold slowly through the hours. Travelers who learn to read the land begin to notice details others miss. A dune with one side sharper than the other signals wind direction. A patch of sand slightly darker than its surroundings shows where warmth still lingers. Subtle variations in air movement hint at where the cold will settle first. The desert communicates constantly, though only a few take the time to understand its quiet signals. In the end, the experience of cold in the Sahara is shaped not only by weather, but by the land's contours. Elevation shelter, wind flow, and heat retention converge into a single force that either supports or undermines survival. The terrain is not passive. It participates in the night, guiding the chill to some places and sparing others. Those who ignore this reality endure harsher nights than necessary. Those who respect it find that even in such an unforgiving environment, subtle advantages exist for those who know where to look. The shape of the land reveals how cold chooses its victims with quiet precision. What unfolds after this awareness forms depends on how travelers place themselves against the desert's shifting breath. In those silent choices lies a challenge far more intricate than temperature alone. Cold in the Sahara carries a particular weight that has little in common with the familiar chill of cities. It descends without the noise of traffic, without the glow of buildings, and without the nearness of other people. Nothing surrounds the traveler except open space and a darkness that feels deeper than night itself. In such conditions, the first challenge is not physical but mental. The mind reacts before the body does, and those reactions shape the rest of the night with surprising force. City cold has edges. One can negotiate a cafe with light spilling out a bus that arrives. Eventually a hallway where warmth waits just a few steps away. In the Sahara, there is no such relief. Once the sun disappears, the desert shifts into a vast absence. The temperature drops sharply, but it is the sudden withdrawal of daylight that unsettles the mind first. A person begins to understand how exposed they are only after the landscape loses its color, leaving nothing but silhouettes and shadows that the wind constantly reshapes. The loneliness of the night is its own pressure. During the day, the desert feels immense, but navigable. At night, that same immensity becomes oppressive. There is no horizon to guide the eye, no nearby sound to anchor attention, no structure to reassure the senses. The silence is not peaceful. It is heavy, as if the world has muted itself. This absence strips away the distractions that normally keep fear at a distance. Thoughts grow louder, doubts stretch out, and the mind begins to fixate on worst-case scenarios without effort. Cold intensifies these reactions. As the body loses warmth, the brain becomes more vulnerable to panic. The heart beats faster, breath becomes shallow, and every small discomfort feels magnified. A brief gust of wind may feel like a threat. The dim outline of a dune may seem to move. Even the stars sharp, and numerous feel distant rather than comforting. Panic does not require sudden danger. It requires only the sensation of losing control, and the Sahara provides that sensation with relentless consistency. People unprepared for this often struggle to stay calm. They may pace in agitation, speak to themselves, or sit rigidly while their thoughts spiral. These reactions accelerate the loss of warmth. Panic burns energy. Anxiety disrupts breathing. Restlessness exposes skin repeatedly to the cold. The night becomes a cycle in which fear worsens the cold, and the cold deepens the fear. Those who succumb to this pattern find the hours stretching impossibly long. Remaining calm is not a matter of willpower, but a practiced discipline. It begins with accepting the nature of the environment rather than resisting it. The desert does not change because a person fears it. The cold does not ease because someone grows anxious. What can change is the traveler's focus. Breaking tasks into small, deliberate steps creates order where the night provides none. Adjusting clothing, checking the fire, drinking warm liquid, and regulating breath. Each action grounds the mind and reminds the body that control has not fully slipped away. Breathing becomes one of the most effective tools. Slow, steady inhalations conserve heat and prevent panic from tightening the chest. The air may be cold, but controlled breathing signals the body that danger is not immediate. This simple act interrupts the cycle of fear and allows clearer thinking to return. In the desert, clarity is not just comforting, it is protective. Staying mentally present is equally important. The mind drifts easily in the quiet, often toward memories or imagined threats. Such drifting creates openings for panic to grow. Bringing attention back to concrete sensations, the texture of the sand through fabric, the warmth of a cup, and the small movements of wind keep the mind anchored. The desert may be vast, but grounding oneself in a single moment can reduce that vastness to something less overwhelming. Experienced nomads rarely show distress during cold nights, not because they are immune, but because they have learned to manage the mental strain. Their calm is a product of repetition, not fearlessness. They know that panic wastes energy the body cannot afford to lose. They move slowly, speak little, and treat each task as part of a steady rhythm that carries them through the night. Their example reveals an important truth. Survival in the Sahara is as much about controlling the mind as protecting the body. Travelers who understand this begin to see the night differently. The cold remains, the darkness remains, but the emotional weight lightens. Instead of fighting the environment, they learn to navigate it, conserving mental energy, choosing deliberate actions, and focusing on what they can influence. The desert respects those who maintain composure. It presses constantly but without malice. Panic interprets the desert as hostile. Discipline interprets it as indifferent. In the end, mental preparation becomes the dividing line between those who endure and those who falter. The night does not need to surprise a traveler to defeat them. It needs only to be met with fear instead of steadiness. Calm is not a luxury here. It is a form of insulation, a layer of protection as essential as clothing or fire. Without it, even the strongest body becomes vulnerable to the cold's slow, methodical work. The pressure of the desert night shows how easily fear unravels strength when cold targets both mind and body. What rises after this realization depends on how travelers steady themselves against the vast emptiness around them. Beyond that fragile steadiness lies a struggle shaped by more than temperature alone. Heat in the Sahara fades with a speed that feels unnatural once the sun disappears, leaving the ground beneath the body transformed from warm sand into a reservoir of chill. What seemed harmless during daylight becomes one of the most persistent sources of discomfort at night. Travelers who settle onto the sand without preparation soon discover that the ground does not passively hold the cold. It actively pulls warmth away, creating a slow, steady drain that weakens the body long before dawn arrives. The desert floor conducts heat with remarkable efficiency. Sand composed of countless loose grains provides no stable insulation. As night deepens, air circulates freely between these grains, accelerating the loss of heat and carrying it downward. A person lying directly on the ground first feels a faint coolness against their back or hips, then a gradual spreading sensation as the cold rises through clothing and settles into muscles. The process is not sudden, but its persistence makes it difficult to counter once it begins. Many travelers misjudge this danger. They assume the air is their primary enemy, focusing on layers of clothing and shelter, while ignoring the terrain beneath them. Yet the ground's ability to absorb heat is as relentless as the wind's ability to steal it. Even those who try to sleep in a sitting position feel the cold seep upward through legs and spine, tightening joints and reducing circulation. The desert does not need dramatic conditions to challenge the body. It relies on quiet, continuous pressure. An insulating layer becomes essential. Without one, the body loses warmth faster than fire or food can replace it. A thermal mat, a folded blanket, or even multiple layers of spare clothing create a vital barrier between the skin and the sand. The purpose is not to add warmth, but to prevent its escape. In a place where heat is scarce, preservation becomes more valuable than production. Travelers who take the time to build such a barrier often endure the night with greater clarity and strength. In the absence of manufactured gear, improvisation becomes necessary. Desert dwellers have long relied on woven mats, dried leaves, or animal hides to create this separation. These materials retain small pockets of air that slow the transfer of heat. Even when the ground beneath remains cold, the barrier prevents direct contact, allowing the body to maintain a more stable temperature. Nomads treat this step as a mandatory part of camp preparation, as fundamental as collecting fuel or securing water. Fatigue, however, can become an obstacle. After long hours of travel, a person might lie down without arranging proper insulation, believing they will adjust later. But once the cold has begun, its slow climb into the body, recovery becomes far more difficult. Shivering disrupts rest, stiffness interrupts sleep, the mind grows foggy. A night spent fighting the cold of the ground rarely allows for full restoration, leaving the traveler weakened for the challenges ahead. The cold that rises from below is often described as more invasive than the chill carried by the wind. It presses into the body rather than against it. It seeps rather than strikes. People speak of it as though the sand itself were breathing upward, sending a steady pulse of chill into their bones. This sensation becomes stronger as the hours pass, influencing not only physical comfort, but mental resilience. A tired, cold body is far more susceptible to fear and confusion. Proper insulation does more than protect warmth. It preserves judgment. Without it, sleep becomes fragmented, and the brain loses its ability to think clearly. The desert's silence, already heavy, becomes suffocating when paired with exhaustion. Actions slow, decisions falter, and the simple tasks of maintaining fire or adjusting clothing become disproportionately difficult. The desert's challenges accumulate quietly, each small oversight feeding into the next. Experienced desert travelers understand this intimately. They never lie directly on the sand. Their bedding arrangements may seem minimal, but each layer is placed with purpose. They do not leave gaps. They do not assume the night will be forgiving. In their eyes, insulation is not a comfort. It is part of the architecture of survival. Each piece reduces the desert's reach and buys time the body would otherwise lose. Failure to create this barrier often becomes apparent near midnight when the cold reaches its harshest point. A person who began the evening feeling stable may wake with numb fingers, stiff limbs, or a sense of disorientation. They may draw closer to the fire or add clothing, but once the deep chill has settled into their back and joints, warmth returns slowly, if at all. The desert rarely gives back what it has taken. Sand so soft and yielding by day becomes a silent adversary at night. It does not attack, it absorbs. It does not warn, it continues. Respecting this quiet transformation becomes part of understanding the desert's deeper nature. Survival is not only a matter of resisting the air above, but of guarding against the cold beneath. The slow rise of ground chill shows how easily the desert undermines those who ignore what lies beneath them. What develops beyond this understanding depends on whether travelers prepare their rest before fatigue weakens their focus. Past that small act of protection waits a trial shaped by more than the surface of the sand. Night in the Sahara begins with a kind of beauty that disarms even those who arrive with caution. The sky stretches wider than seems possible, filled with stars so sharp they appear carved into the darkness. The dunes hold their shape in pale outlines, shifting gently under the faint touch of moonlight. Everything looks still clean and impossibly distant. For a moment, the cold seems secondary to the spectacle above, a quiet companion rather than a threat. This illusion is one of the desert's most powerful traps. People who have never experienced such a landscape often pause too long in admiration. They stand unmoving, eyes lifted toward the sky, unaware that the chill is already working its way into their clothing. Beauty in this place has a way of slowing the body's responses. The mind drifts, with the stars losing track of how quickly the temperature is falling. In these early moments, the desert trains attention upward, while danger spreads from all sides. As the night deepens, the cold becomes more precise. It does not strike suddenly. Its approach resembles a slow tightening around the ribs, a faint pressure against the back, an ache in the fingers that grows before it is fully noticed. Wind slides between layers of fabric with surprising ease, finding small openings and turning them into pathways of discomfort. Even a well-prepared traveler feels these intrusions, though they may not immediately recognize how much heat they are losing. The beauty of the night contributes to this miscalculation. The stillness encourages people to remain motionless, a mistake when temperatures drop below freezing. Standing to admire the view, sitting too long beside dunes, or pausing on exposed ridges, all give the cold opportunities to settle more deeply into the body. The serenity of the landscape masks the urgency of the environment. It becomes easy to forget that this vast, quiet place shows no concern for those who marvel at it. The contrast between the sky and the cold creates a strange tension. The stars suggest openness and wonder, yet the cold creeping into clothing and skin tells a different story. The mind tries to reconcile the two sensations, often failing to recognize which of them poses the real danger. The more beautiful the night becomes, the easier it is to underestimate its severity. Beauty distracts. Cold does its work while attention is elsewhere. Wind contributes to the illusion. Even when it arrives in soft gusts, it carries a sharpness that betrays the true temperature. A gentle movement of air across the dunes can drop the perceived warmth dramatically. The body responds slowly, struggling to maintain heat while being lulled by the soundless expanse. Travelers describe this sensation as a betrayal. How something so beautiful can hide discomfort so effectively. The ground, too, becomes part of the trap. Sand reflects the sky's light in soft hues, creating an almost dreamlike landscape. People sit or lie down to take in the scene, unaware that the cold beneath them is extracting heat more quickly than the air above. The sensation may feel pleasant at first, cool rather than cold, but it shifts into numbness with little warning. By the time the discomfort is recognized, heat has already been lost. This quiet danger affects even those accustomed to harsh environments. Experienced travelers often speak of nights when they became too focused on the sky, letting the cold creep deeper than intended. They recall shivering violently after standing motionless for too long, or feeling the sudden heaviness of limbs that had grown chilled without awareness. Respect for the desert is built not only on knowledge, but on the memory of moments when beauty clouded judgment. The psychological impact of such beauty is powerful. The sky creates a sense of safety, as though vastness itself offers protection. The silence feels gentle. The absence of movement calms the mind. In this softened state, a person is less aware of danger. Signals are tightening, chest-tingling fingers and trembling muscles. The body tries to communicate its needs, but the mind remains elsewhere, captivated by a display of light that feels almost unreal. When dawn eventually reveals the consequences of such distraction, the contrast becomes stark. The same dunes that appeared calm and welcoming by moonlight look indifferent in daylight. The cold that felt subtle while admiring the stars becomes evident in stiff joints, dry skin, and lingering exhaustion. Beauty leaves no trace of its deception. Only the body remembers. Survival in the Sahara requires seeing past the landscape's allure. The night sky may be extraordinary, but it offers no warmth. The dunes may glow softly, but they do not protect. Beauty here functions as a thin veil stretched over danger, allowing it to approach without resistance. Those who treat the desert night as a spectacle often discover too late that they have given the cold time to work. Respecting the desert means acknowledging that its most captivating qualities are often intertwined with its most lethal. Stillness conceals threat. Silence encourages complacency. Beauty slows awareness. The night does not hide its intentions, yet many fail to interpret what it shows. The desert's quiet brilliance reveals how easily admiration weakens vigilance when cold begins its subtle work. What develops in the hours that follow depends on whether travelers learn to separate wonder from safety. Across that delicate boundary waits a lesson the desert delivers without hesitation. Sleep in the Sahara is not a simple retreat from exhaustion. It is a negotiation with the cold that spreads steadily through the night. The body, worn down by long hours of walking across dunes and breathing dry air, enters this state already weakened. As darkness deepens, every breath releases warmth that the desert will not return. The struggle to keep heat becomes most apparent when a traveler attempts to rest, because lying still invites the cold closer than movement ever does. Remaining warm while sleeping is not merely a matter of comfort. It affects clarity of thought, recovery of strength, and the ability to meet the next day without suffering the slow deterioration that cold creates. Every decision made before sleep determines how well the body endures the hours when awareness fades. In the desert, those decisions carry weight long after the traveler's eyes close. Curling the body into a fetal position becomes one of the most instinctive responses to the cold. The posture reduces surface area, conserving heat by protecting vital organs and limiting exposure to the air. It is a vulnerable shape, but one that minimizes unnecessary strain. In this position, the body retains warmth more effectively, drawing heat toward the core where it matters most. Travelers often adopt it unconsciously, their bodies recognizing the threat even when their minds drift towards sleep. A specialized sleeping bag offers more structured protection. In the desert, its value lies not only in insulation, but but in its ability to trap pockets of warm air before the cold steals them. Standard bedding or loosely wrapped blankets fail to provide the same degree of containment. The sleeping bag's design creates a controlled environment, slowing the loss of heat and shielding the sleeper from drafts that slide across the ground. Even a modest quality bag becomes a vital tool when temperatures drop below freezing. Maintaining warmth around the head is equally important. While limbs can tolerate cooling to some degree, the brain cannot. Exposure around the head accelerates heat loss and leads to fogginess, disorientation, and shallow sleep. Travelers who keep their heads uncovered often wake with a sense of heaviness, as if clarity has drained away during the night. A hat, scarf, or tightened hood preserves warmth where the body needs it most, reinforcing cognitive stability for the following day. The act of preparing for sleep becomes a ritual shaped by necessity. Clothing must be arranged so that no openings remain for cold to enter. Layers must be adjusted carefully too. Many cause overheating that leads to sweating, which becomes dangerous once the body cools again. Too few leave gaps that allow cold to gather. Fire provides psychological comfort, but its warmth fades quickly at a distance. The sleeper must rely on internal heat, not the illusion of warmth from a nearby flame. The ground beneath the sleeper remains a constant adversary. Even with a thermal barrier, the body must avoid prolonged contact with cold surfaces. Small shifts in position help prevent heat from settling into the sand. People who sleep deeply without adjusting often wake with stiff joints and a chill buried in their muscles. The desert punishes stillness, and even a prepared sleeper must find small movements to disrupt the cold's progress. Those unaccustomed to the Sahara often underestimate how much energy the body expends simply to remain warm during sleep. The exhaustion that sets in after a cold night is not merely the result of poor rest. It is the outcome of hours spent burning calories to sustain body temperature. This effort leaves travelers drained by dawn, slower in their movements, and more vulnerable to mistakes. A night without proper insulation or positioning can shape the entire day that follows. Nomads understand this relationship between sleep and survival with quiet precision. Their preparations appear simple, but each element is deliberate. They shape their sleeping spaces to minimize wind intrusion, arrange their coverings to maintain airflow without heat loss, and position themselves so their bodies warm each other when resting close by. They know that the desert offers no generosity. Warmth must be preserved intentionally, not assumed. Psychological steadiness also affects the quality of sleep. Anxiety tightens muscles and accelerates breathing, increasing heat loss. Calm allows the body to settle more efficiently, conserving energy. Those who lie awake worrying about the cold lose warmth faster than those who breathe steadily and focus on maintaining a compact posture. The mind shapes the body's resilience, even in unconscious hours. Sleep does not erase the cold's presence. It merely pauses the traveler's awareness of it. The desert continues its slow work regardless. Warmth escapes through every gap, and the body fights a quiet battle beneath layers of fabric. The success of that battle depends on choices made before fatigue takes over. When the sleeper rises at dawn, shivering or steady, the results become clear without the desert needing to articulate its lesson. Survival in the Sahara requires understanding that sleep is not rest alone. It is a strategic act. The body becomes vulnerable the moment awareness slips, and the cold waits for that vulnerability to deepen. Protecting warmth becomes a form of vigilance that must continue even in stillness. The struggle to stay warm during sleep shows how the desert tests a traveler's endurance when awareness fades. What holds steady after waking depends on how carefully warmth was guarded through the long hours of darkness. Beyond that, fragile protection lies a truth that reshapes how rest is understood in such a place. Moisture in the Sahara becomes a threat long before the night reveals its coldest hours. Sweat that collects beneath clothing during the day, droplets that linger after drinking water, or damp fabric caused by sudden temperature changes. All of these turn into liabilities when darkness settles. What seems insignificant while the sun is still high transforms into a source of rapid heat loss once the desert shifts into its nighttime stillness. The dryness of the air makes this danger feel counterintuitive, but the body remembers it quickly. Sweat behaves differently in the desert. Under the relentless sun, the body produces moisture in an attempt to regulate temperature. But evaporation happens so fast that people often forget how much fluid they have lost. Clothing absorbs some of this moisture, holding it close to the skin, even after the heat has eased. When night comes, that same moisture cools rapidly, creating a chilling layer no amount of outer insulation can fully counter. A traveler who enters the night with damp fabric is already at a disadvantage. Even the faintest wetness becomes a conduit for cold. A damp cloth conducts temperature far more efficiently than dry fabric, allowing the chill to move through layers with surprising ease. The air does not need to be freezing for this effect to take hold. A mild drop in temperature can feel severe when moisture accelerates heat loss. People often mistake the resulting shivers as ordinary fatigue, unaware that their clothing is quietly working against them. Changing into dry clothes before sleep becomes essential. It is a small action, yet it determines how the night unfolds. The body's ability to maintain warmth depends on how well the skin is protected from dampness. Fresh fabric absorbs heat differently, creating a stable environment against the cold. Without this preparation, warmth dissipates too quickly, leaving the sleeper exposed to long hours of discomfort. Those who neglect this step often learn the lesson long before dawn, waking repeatedly as chills break apart their rest. Material choice plays an equally important role. Natural fibers such as wool or cotton allow moisture to escape in a way that synthetic fabrics often cannot. They trap pockets of air that buffer against the cold while allowing sweat to dissipate gradually. Travelers who wear clothing designed for quick drying or moisture wicking experience fewer drops in temperature once night arrives. In an environment where warmth is difficult to maintain, fabric becomes a tool rather than merely a covering. The desert's dryness can also mislead newcomers into believing moisture is not a concern. The air may feel arid, the wind sharp and the sand powdery, but the body still produces sweat under strain. Hikers, walking across dunes, generate heat with each step, and even light exertion can cause perspiration beneath layers of clothing. When the sun disappears, this trapped moisture cools faster than expected, creating a sensation that spreads slowly through limbs and spine. A warm body becomes a cold one in minutes. Water spills, though rare, become an unexpected hazard as well. A dropped canteen or a small splash during the evening meal can leave a patch of fabric wet enough to hinder heat retention. The wetness continues to steal warmth until the fabric dries, which may take hours in nighttime temperatures. Nomads respond to such incidents immediately adjusting layers or replacing garments before the cold takes advantage of the lapse. Their attentiveness reflects an understanding passed down through generations. A traveler caught unaware might underestimate how quickly this effect worsens. They may attempt to ignore the dampness or rationalize it as manageable, especially when fatigue weighs heavily after a long day. But the desert lacks mercy for such assumptions. Moisture does not fade into insignificance. It becomes more prominent as the night deepens. The body's reserves drain quietly, leaving the person more vulnerable to confusion, slowed thinking, and the creeping numbness that signals greater danger. Remaining dry becomes part of mental discipline as much as physical preparation. Awareness must extend beyond comfort. It requires checking clothing regularly, adjusting layers before sweat accumulates, and preventing small issues from compounding. Even the simple act of removing a layer during strenuous activity can reduce perspiration and prevent moisture from building up later. The desert rewards those who stay ahead of the cold rather than reacting to it. Nomads embody this discipline with ease. Their attire reflects centuries of adaptation, loose enough to promote airflow, layered enough to manage temperature changes, and made from fibers that respond predictably to sweat and wind. They understand that dryness is not an abstract principle, but a foundation for survival. They treat wet fabric with immediate concern, knowing how quickly it can unsettle the night. Moisture also affects sleep quality. A damp shirt or pair of socks keeps the body restless, tightening muscles and shortening each period of rest. Dreams become fragmented, mind and body unable to relax fully as chill spreads through skin and bone. By morning, exhaustion sets in, reducing the ability to navigate dunes or withstand the next night's cold. What began as a small oversight becomes a weight carried into the next day. Survival in the Sahara is built on understanding that the greatest dangers often hide in the details. Moisture, though barely noticeable at first, undermines the body quietly 1 degree of warmth at a time. To stay dry is to keep control over the night. To ignore it is to invite a struggle far harder to reverse. The challenge of staying dry reveals how even the smallest amount of moisture becomes a threat in the desert's cold. What unfolds beyond this awareness depends on how attentively travelers protect their limited warmth. Past that vigilance lies a deeper contest between body and environment. Night in the Sahara strips away sound until every breath feels separated from the world, And in that silence, solitude becomes a different kind of cold. A person lying alone beneath the dark sky faces not just the falling temperature, but the steady erosion of warmth that happens more quickly when the body has no nearby source to share heat with. The desert exaggerates loneliness in a way that makes it physical, pressing against skin as steadily as the cold does. Human bodies generate heat at all hours, and when several people sleep close together, that warmth pools between them in a shallow, protective layer. Travelers who decide to rest alone often believe their clothing and blankets will be enough, but the air quickly draws out their stored heat. The difference becomes noticeable. Early in the night, the cold settles faster, the shivers come sooner, and the sense of exposure sharpens. A shared space, even if quiet and wordless, becomes an anchor against that creeping chill. Those who sleep near one another often find their rest more stable. Warmth travels easily through still air, lingering between bodies, allowing each person to conserve energy. Muscles relax more fully, breathing steadies, and the night feels less abrasive. Under such conditions, even the smallest gesture of proximity creates pockets of comfort that the desert cannot strip away. A group curled beneath shared blankets, or lying close within a large tent, experiences a noticeably gentler night. The desert's cold is not uniform. It drifts unpredictably, passing across dunes and into open shelter with subtle changes in wind direction. A person sleeping alone must endure these shifts without warning. But when a group rests together, they unconsciously buffer one another from sudden drafts and temperature drops. The presence of others reduces vulnerability, even without deliberate effort. This natural shared defense has been relied upon by nomads for generations, carried as quietly as every other survival lesson. Beyond warmth, the psychological steadiness provided by the company becomes its own form of insulation. Solitude magnifies fear, and fear drains energy. In the Sahara, where the mind can lose clarity, long before the body fails, this matters greatly. Hearing the faint breathing or quiet shifting of others in the dark reassures travelers that they are not confronting the night alone. That reassurance slows the racing thoughts that often accompany extreme cold, preserving strength for the hours ahead. Keeping watch in turns becomes easier with more than one person. A shared night means someone stays awake while others rest, tending the fire, adjusting embers and observing the faint movements of wind or sand. A lone traveler must divide rest and vigilance in unequal, exhausting intervals, risking both insufficient sleep and inattentive fire maintenance. With a group, the responsibility spreads evenly and the fire remains steady, reducing the cold's ability to take advantage of fading embers. The fire itself becomes a point of connection among those resting nearby. Its warmth radiates outward, but weakens with distance, so people often arrange themselves in a semicircle or cluster, oriented toward the flames. In doing so, they create a shared zone of protection, where each person benefits from the fire and from the combined heat of the others. This communal positioning arises, naturally shaped by instinct and experience, rather than explicit planning. When someone begins to show early signs of hypothermia, uncontrolled shivering, slurred speech, or unusual drowsiness, those nearby can respond quickly. A companion can add layers, share body heat, or adjust the person's position to preserve warmth. Alone, these early symptoms may go unnoticed, progressing into more dangerous stages before dawn. The presence of others becomes a silent safeguard, one that has saved countless travelers long before modern survival guides existed. Even nomadic tribes known for their resilience rarely sleep entirely isolated. Their tents are arranged with practical spacing, and family members rest close enough to share their combined warmth. The structure of their shelters reflects this understanding, fabrics layered not only to block wind, but to trap pockets of heat generated by the group. This method has endured across centuries because it works regardless of the night's mood or severity. Travelers unfamiliar with the desert often underestimate the psychological impact of sleeping alone. The vast openness creates an illusion of personal insignificance that can turn overwhelming as darkness deepens. Thoughts drift unpredictably, shaped by fatigue and cold, making sleep more fragile. Sharing a resting space grounds the mind, offering a steady presence that counters the desert's isolating pull. Even without conversation, the proximity of others creates a sense of belonging that eases the strain. Group sleeping also minimizes energy waste. Individuals who sleep alone burn calories faster as their bodies struggle to maintain temperature. Over multiple nights, this leads to exhaustion, decreased alertness, and reduced ability to function during the day's heat. Those sleeping in groups, however, conserve more energy, allowing them to travel longer distances, manage daily tasks more effectively, and withstand future nights with better resilience. The desert often feels indifferent, neither hostile nor welcoming, simply vast. But during the coldest hours, that indifference becomes sharper, reminding travelers how fragile warmth truly is. Choosing not to sleep alone becomes an act of quiet defiance against that fragility. It is a reminder that survival often rests on connection, not only with the environment, but with the people enduring it alongside you. Sleeping near others stabilizes warmth and steadies the mind against the desert's isolating cold. What emerges from this shared rest becomes a shield against the night's quiet threats. Beyond that circle of warmth lies another truth waiting beneath the surface of the cold. A desert evening can shift faster than the body expects, turning what felt manageable only moments earlier into a quiet threat settling along the skin. Travelers who have spent the entire day under relentless heat rarely imagine that danger will come from the other direction. Yet as temperatures fall rapidly, the body begins revealing its first warnings in ways that seem almost insignificant. A slight tremor, a faint tightening in the hands, a sense that warmth is slipping away faster than it can be replaced. These are the earliest signals of hypothermia, subtle enough that a tired person might ignore them entirely. Shivering rises as the first defensive reaction, an involuntary effort to produce heat when the environment strips it too quickly. At the start, it feels like a normal response to cooling air, but in the Sahara, declining temperatures do not stop where comfort ends. The trembling spreads across the body, becoming more forceful as the muscles burn energy in an attempt to maintain core temperature. What begins as a simple chill becomes an unmistakable struggle, one that the desert does not ease once it begins. The extremities show the next stage. Fingers lose precision, refusing to move as intended. Tasks that were easy before sunset, tying straps, lighting a small flame, and adjusting equipment, become strangely difficult. The skin grows pale as the body pulls blood inward to preserve heat around vital organs. A person may not even notice the shift because numbness replaces the discomfort. This loss of sensation feels mild, but it signals that warmth is no longer being preserved effectively. When coordination weakens, the body slows down. Movements lack their usual rhythm. Steps become heavier and slightly unsteady. A traveler may attempt to perform routine tasks, but find their hands responding too slowly. The desert's cold does not deliver sharp pain. It dulls everything, pushing the mind and muscles into a sluggish state that creeps forward without dramatic warning. Cognitive decline is one of the most dangerous phases. Thoughts begin to stretch, drifting away from clarity. A person may feel confused about simple details, where they placed their gloves, why they wandered a few steps from the fire, and what they intended to do before the cold interrupted. This uncertainty grows quietly, making it difficult for the traveler to realize the seriousness of their condition. Hypothermia clouds the ability to judge what is happening, and in the vastness of the Sahara, that loss of judgment rarely goes unpunished. Speech changes early as well. Words become slow, soft, and poorly formed. Sentences break apart or never finish. Communication falters, and those around may notice the change long before the affected person does. The gap between intention and expression widens, signaling the mind's struggle to keep pace with the body's decline. Fatigue follows, creating the illusion of relief. As the body exhausts its remaining energy, shivering weakens. Muscles relax and drowsiness settles in a deceptive calm that feels strangely comforting. Many travelers mistake this stage for improvement, believing they are finally adapting to the cold. In truth, it indicates the opposite. The body is shutting down, conserving what little warmth remains by suppressing activity. Sleep feels tempting, but it is one of the most dangerous impulses under freezing conditions. Responsiveness diminishes as hypothermia deepens. A person may answer questions slowly or not at all. They may stare into the distance, their eyes losing focus and their awareness slipping away. These quiet behaviors reveal that the cold has moved past the stage of discomfort and into a place where survival requires immediate help. Left alone, a traveler may simply sit down, close their eyes, and drift away from consciousness without realizing the severity of their situation. Worsening judgment often leads to risky behavior. Individuals suffering from advanced hypothermia might remove clothing, believing they are overheating. They may wander into open terrain, following imagined landmarks, or misinterpreting shadows as familiar shapes. Their perception becomes unreliable, and the desert uses that unreliability to its advantage. A single misguided step can put them beyond the reach of assistance. Companions who observe these signs must act quickly. The early stages of hypothermia can be reversed with warmth, shelter, and close monitoring, but only if recognized soon enough. Adding layers, bringing the traveler closer to a fire, sharing body heat, or offering warm drinks can steady the decline. Alone, however, a person rarely understands what is happening. The desert isolates them, not only physically, but mentally disrupting their awareness at the moment they most need it. Recognizing these early symptoms is one of the most important skills for anyone attempting to cross or camp in the Sahara. The cold does not announce itself with dramatic events. It creeps inward, taking warmth piece by piece, until the traveler becomes slower, quieter, and ultimately unable to respond. Each sign, shivering, numbness, confusion, slowed speech. Exhaustion marks a step along a path that grows harder to reverse. For many, the stars overhead offer reassurance, their stillness giving the illusion of safety. Yet the vast sky has no warmth to give, and the sand beneath steals heat faster than the body can replace it. Those who underestimate hypothermia in the desert rarely do so twice. Understanding the signs is not just knowledge, but survival, a small defense against a force that works with patience rather than speed. Early hypothermia emerges gently, taking clarity and warmth long before the danger is fully understood. What continues after these first symptoms depends on whether they are met with awareness or neglect. Along this fragile boundary lies a deeper struggle that reveals how vulnerable the body becomes under relentless cold. Silence settles over the Sahara in a way that unnerves even those who believe they understand the desert. The wind fades, movement stops, and the night stretches without shape or sound. In that stillness, the real danger begins to reveal itself. No roar echoes across the dunes. No approaching footsteps mark the arrival of a predator. What arrives instead is something quieter, something that presses against the skin with the softness of breath, but the intent of a patient hunter. Cold does not chase. It waits, and in waiting it becomes far more lethal than anything with teeth or claws. Many bodies later discovered in the desert bear no marks of violence. Clothing remains intact, supplies untouched footprints leading nowhere unusual. There is no sign of attack, no evidence of struggle. The person simply stopped responding to the world around them, slipping into stillness that the desert then preserved. This absence of physical trauma often confuses those who find the remains, yet the explanation is buried in the hours just before consciousness faded. Hypothermia does not announce itself with force. It takes hold gradually, removing the ability to fight long before the danger is recognized. In the Sahara's coldest hours, the body loses its ability to judge what is happening. A traveler may sit down believing they only need a moment of rest, their thoughts slow drifting without urgency. Breathing becomes shallow movements soften, and awareness dissolves little by little. There is no panic, no attempt to stand, no desperate fight. The desert prefers decisions made in exhaustion, small choices that feel harmless at first, but grow heavier as warmth drains away. When rescuers describe the victims they have found, they often mention how peaceful they appear. Hands folded gently, face relaxed posture natural, as if the person simply fell asleep and never needed to wake. This calmness is what makes the cold so deceptive. It does not frighten its victims in their final moments. It comforts them. The failing body interprets the slowing of functions as relief, as a release from the shivering and confusion that marked the earlier stages. That sense of ease is a dangerous lie, but by the time it arrives, resistance has already become impossible. In many cases, the surroundings reveal the moment the cold took control. A half-buried fire pit still holding faint traces of earlier warmth. A blanket that slipped just out of reach. A water flask was lying open beside the body. These small details show that the person had begun tasks they could not complete. Their hands lost precision, their thoughts faded, and the cold claimed the space left behind. The desert rarely offers dramatic scenes. It ends lives quietly, leaving behind only the arrangements of a final attempt to stay awake. Animals seldom pose the greatest threat during these nights. Predator activity diminishes as temperatures fall, and most wildlife seeks shelter rather than prey. What remains active is the cold itself, never sleeping, never retreating, always stripping heat from the living. Even the strongest desert guides respect this force, knowing that no amount of experience can fully eliminate its dangers. They build fires that must not fail, watch each other for signs of confusion, and ensure no one wanders from the group after the cold sets in. For those who underestimate the night, the transition happens quickly. One moment they feel chilled but alert, and the next they feel strangely detached from their surroundings. their internal sense of urgency fades. They stop adjusting their clothing, stop moving toward warmth, and stop speaking clearly. The cold does not need power. It only needs time. With the desert's vast openness and the absence of anything that reflects warmth, it gains that time easily. Travelers often describe hearing the desert differently at night. Sounds become distant, muted, almost swallowed. This sensory change contributes to the illusion that nothing threatening is nearby. But the cold is not a threat one hears. It creeps across the skin and into the core, tightening its hold with every breath. Darkness amplifies its presence, removing distractions until only the slow decline of temperature remains. Alone in that environment, a person may not even realize that isolation has become part of the danger. Those who survive often recall moments that felt harmless, sitting down for just a minute, closing their eyes to steady their thoughts, lowering their head because the air felt heavy. These small gestures, insignificant in daylight, become the first steps toward collapse during freezing nights. The desert does not need dramatic mistakes. It only needs a pause long enough for the cold to slip past a person's defenses. What makes this threat terrifying is not its violence, but its subtlety. A creature stalking from the shadows would be easier to fear. A sudden storm would be easier to prepare for. Instead, the Sahara offers a danger that feels gentle at first, stealing strength through calmness rather than force. The absence of noise, the peaceful sky, the soft texture of the sand, all of it works to hide the truth that the cold is tightening around the traveler's body with every passing minute. To witness the aftermath is to understand how quiet the final moments must have been. No signs of panic, no evidence of resistance, only stillness shaped by the desert's indifference. The night does not need to announce itself as a killer. It acts without sound, without motion, without warning, taking what it wants simply by waiting long enough. Cold in the Sahara reveals its power, not through violence, but through silence. What unfolds after that realization depends on whether warmth is defended or surrendered. Across that thin line lies a truth that shows how easily a life can fade beneath an unmoving sky. Fear behaves strangely in the desert. It does not reveal itself through dramatic gestures or loud declarations. Instead, it enters quietly, settling behind the ribs, like an unwelcome guest that refuses to leave. When a traveler faces the sharp cold of the Sahara night, the mind often becomes the first battlefield. Long before the body shows signs of physical decline, thoughts begin to shift, narrowing, tightening, and circling the discomfort spreading through the skin. This mental pressure drains energy faster than the cold alone, quietly accelerating the descent into danger. Stress consumes warmth with surprising efficiency. The body, sensing a threat, prepares itself as though something must be fought or escaped. Muscles tense, the heart beats harder, and breathing becomes shallow. Each of these reactions demands energy, and in freezing conditions, that energy is stolen directly from the reserves meant to preserve internal heat. What begins as a simple moment of unease becomes a steady leak, allowing the cold to advance with little resistance. A traveler who panics is already giving the night more power than it should have. Fear also disrupts circulation. When anxiety tightens the chest and speeds the pulse, blood vessels constrict, especially around the hands and feet. These extremities cool quickly, sending signals of discomfort that strengthen the sense of danger. This deepens the cycle. Fear encourages the cold, and the cold encourages fear. Once caught in this loop, a traveler loses control of their ability to judge the situation. The desert does not need to attack directly. It waits for the mind to exhaust itself, letting the cold finish what stress has begun. In contrast, those who maintain calmness show a remarkable advantage. A steady mind reduces unnecessary movement, preserves energy, and keeps circulation flowing more smoothly. Calmness allows a person to act with clarity, adjusting clothing, preparing heat sources, checking shelter tasks that seem simple but often determine survival. A positive mindset does not mean ignoring danger. It means facing it without surrendering to panic. In freezing conditions, this emotional steadiness becomes a source of warmth, as real as any fire. Fatigue and despair often enter together. When the night grows long and the cold persists, the body begins to lose trust in its own strength. Even experienced travelers feel their resolve weakening. The desert's silence amplifies every doubt, magnifying the sense of isolation. If the mind yields fully to these thoughts, the body follows. A person may stop moving, stop seeking warmth, or stop speaking. Each pause, each hesitation, gives the cold more room to settle deeper, Hypothermia rarely arrives suddenly. It comes when the mind has already begun to let go. Positive thinking in such conditions is not a simple comfort. It is a form of resistance. Focusing on small goals, such as maintaining a fire or preserving body heat, prevents the mind from drifting into helplessness. Repeating familiar routines keeps thoughts grounded. Even remembering why survival matters, family responsibilities, or personal determination creates an internal force that slows the cold's advance. These mental anchors cannot stop the temperature from dropping, but they help ensure the traveler does not surrender to it prematurely. Companionship strengthens this effect. A group that speaks calmly, checks on each other, and shares simple encouragement creates an environment that reduces fear. Observing another person's steady behavior often stabilizes one's own thoughts. Even a silent presence can help. Knowing someone else is awake and alert breaks the illusion that the desert's emptiness is absolute. Humans are not built to face isolation well, especially in environments where danger hides in stillness rather than movement. In moments when panic rises, breathing becomes a crucial tool. Slow inhalations warm the air slightly before it reaches the lungs, easing the body's strain. Controlled breathing also interrupts the cycle of fear, giving the mind a point of focus that pulls it away from spiraling thoughts. Many travelers underestimate how deeply breathing influences survival. In freezing temperatures, the difference between steady breaths and frantic ones can be the difference between conserving energy and losing it too quickly. A positive mindset also encourages awareness. When the mind is clear, subtle signs of hypothermia, numbness, slowed speech, and confusion are recognized early. Recognizing these signals allows for corrective action before the condition progresses. Panic clouds perception, leaving the traveler unaware of their own decline. Calmness, on the other hand, sharpens attention, helping the person detect that something is changing within their body long before it becomes irreversible. The desert, indifferent to human emotion, still responds to the choices individuals make. A strong mind does not change the temperature, but it changes the traveler. It keeps them moving when stillness is dangerous, thinking when confusion is dangerous, breathing evenly when fear is dangerous. In a place where the environment offers no mercy, mental discipline becomes a quiet form of shelter. When reflecting on survival stories, one pattern repeats. Those who lived through freezing desert nights often describe not their physical strength, but their mental steadiness. They speak of refusing to panic, of focusing on small actions, of keeping thoughts anchored to life rather than fear. Their bodies endured because their minds endured first. In the Sahara, warmth is not just a physical state, it is also a psychological one. A steady mind becomes its own source of warmth when the night presses hardest. What develops after this realization depends on how the traveler holds their thoughts when the cold begins to test them. Through that inner landscape lies a challenge that pushes beyond physical endurance into the quiet territory of resilience. A freezing desert night often reveals that survival does not always depend on grand preparations or heavy equipment. In many cases, it is the smallest objects, things light enough to slip into a pocket or vanish into the folds of a pack, that become crucial. They do not look impressive under the sun, and they rarely seem urgent until the moment the temperature collapses. Yet, when the Sahara drops toward 4 degrees Celsius, these modest tools begin to shape the difference between enduring the night and losing ground to the cold's steady advance. A miniature heat pack, for example, appears insignificant during the day. It rests quietly, not indicating its value. But once darkness settles, it becomes a concentrated source of warmth, a controlled flame without danger. Travelers hold it between their palms, press it near their chest, or slip it beneath layers where heat escapes fastest. Its size allows it to reach places a fire cannot touch, inside a sleeping bag, between layers of cloth, or against cold skin that has begun to lose sensation. Though its warmth is limited, the psychological comfort it provides is often equal to its physical effect. The mind steadies when the hands feel heat again. Chemical warmers behave similarly. Activated by friction or exposure to air, they release a slow, steady warmth that supports the body during the hours when fires burn low or wind makes tending flames difficult. Their reliability becomes a quiet companion in the dark. Even when the fire struggles against gusts of cold air, the warmer continues to do its work, hidden beneath clothing and unseen by others. In a landscape ruled by extremes, such consistency becomes a form of protection that cannot be overstated. Improvisation also plays a role in survival. When socks fail, tear, or become damp, Resourceful travelers wrap their feet in scarves, spare shirts, or whatever fabric remains dry. Feet lose heat quickly, and once numbness spreads, walking becomes difficult and decision-making weakens. Covering them well, no matter how unconventional the method, helps preserve the ability to move, to seek warmth, to act with clarity. In the desert, the appearance of an item matters far less than its function, and the function of dry, insulating fabric can be the difference between strength and collapse. A small flashlight, another object easy to underestimate, carries its own form of importance. During the day, it seems unnecessary. There is nothing to illuminate under the sun's glare, no shadows deep enough to warrant its presence. But at night, when darkness thickens and the temperature drops, the flashlight guides hands that tremble from cold, helps locate tools buried in packs, and ensures the traveler does not wander blindly into deeper exposure. More importantly, the batteries must be protected. If kept outside the cold, drains their power rapidly. Travelers who understand the desert tuck the flashlight close to their body, letting their own warmth protect the light that will later protect them. These objects share a common feature. Their value becomes clear only when conditions deteriorate. They do not promise safety, but they reinforce the body's efforts, offering just enough warmth or clarity to delay the cold's progress. A single moment saved a few seconds of regained control. A spark of comfort, a clear view of one's surroundings can shift the path of the night. In freezing environments, survival is rarely the result of one grand decision. It is the accumulation of small choices, each supported by tools that seem trivial until the moment they are needed. Even the act of carrying these objects affects the traveler's mindset. Knowing that warmth can be produced with a simple gesture, that feet can be wrapped if conditions turn harsh, or that light can be summoned by pressing a switch reduces panic. Fear recedes slightly when preparedness takes its place. A calm mind conserves energy, and energy preserves heat. In this way, each object serves two purposes, one physical, one psychological. Still, possession alone is not enough. These tools must be used before hypothermia progresses too far. The desert offers no forgiveness to those who hesitate. A flashlight becomes useless in the hands of someone too numb to press a button. A heat pack cannot revive clarity once confusion has overtaken the mind. Quick recognition of danger allows these small tools to function as intended, extending the traveler's ability to act while the night grows colder. The quiet irony of the Sahara is that the environment itself appears empty, barren, and devoid of complexity. Yet the struggle to survive its nights often hinges on objects small enough to be forgotten in a bag's corner. They do not look like instruments of survival, but they uphold the traveler when the desert begins to narrow the margins between life and loss. In a place where the temperature can fall faster than judgment can adapt, these modest items become the closest thing to allies. Stories of survivors often mention these objects as afterthoughts, yet the pattern is unmistakable. The presence of heat, packs dry cloth, or a protected light gave them minutes, sometimes only seconds, that allowed them to correct their course. A forgotten item, or a drained battery, led others toward an outcome they never had the chance to reverse. In the Sahara, the scale of survival shrinks until even the smallest measure matters. Small tools gain immense importance when the cold begins to erase a traveler's strength, piece by piece. What arises once these items are brought into use depends on how well they support the body's fading warmth. Within these modest defenses lies a reminder that survival often rests on details overlooked during the heat of the day. Survival in the Sahara is never an accident. It is not granted by chance or fortune, nor is it something a traveler can improvise under the pressure of a freezing night. The desert exposes the unprepared with startling speed, revealing the gap between confidence and ability. Those who believe they can learn as they go often discover too late that the environment does not tolerate uncertainty. The cold, the silence, the shifting sand, each becomes a teacher whose lessons leave no room for mistakes. The people who understand the desert best are those who were raised within its rhythms. For generations, nomadic families have passed knowledge from parent to child, not as formal instruction, but as lived practice. A young shepherd learns to watch the sky, to feel the direction of the wind on the skin, to sense changes in temperature long before the sun dips. These skills are not spoken as rules. They become instinct-shaping responses long before danger becomes visible. Travelers from far away, even the most determined, cannot develop such instincts in a fleeting visit. Repetition is the heart of mastery. The nomads do not encounter the desert once. They move through it every day, meeting its heat, its wind, its sandstorms, and its cold nights with familiarity. They tie clothing in specific ways, arrange blankets with precise folds, and select camp locations based on subtle shifts in terrain. None of these choices appears dramatic, yet each one contributes to safety. By repeating these practices thousands of times, they refine their responses until survival becomes seamless, almost effortless. A newcomer, by contrast, must consciously think through each step. They debate whether to add a layer of clothing, whether to reposition their shelter, and whether their fire needs reinforcement. This hesitation costs time and energy, two resources the desert drains without sympathy. While an experienced nomad adjusts instinctively at the first sign of cooling air, a novice waits until discomfort becomes undeniable. That delay alone can determine the outcome of the night. Tools behave differently in untrained hands. A lighter must be shielded from the wind, a blanket must be tucked in tight, and a fire must be fed steadily instead of sporadically. These seem like minor details, but in freezing conditions, minor details accumulate quickly. Someone who has practiced these actions many times performs them with calm precision, even when the cold stiffens their fingers. A novice grows clumsy, frustrated, and increasingly uncertain. Skill is not just knowledge. It is memory embedded in the muscles, ready even when the mind slows under stress. The desert has a way of testing resolve. Those who lack experience often overestimate their ability to adapt, assuming that determination will compensate for unfamiliarity. But determination alone does not build a shelter correctly, does not recognize dangerous dips in temperature, and does not notice the early signs of disorientation in the dark. The cold demands more than courage. It demands competence. And competence comes only from experience, repeated until it forms an unbroken chain. Generational knowledge among nomads includes understanding what cannot be predicted. They know not to rely on a single method of keeping warm, not to trust a fire that burns too quickly, and not to camp in areas where wind gathers strength. Their wisdom contains traces of countless nights when the temperature sank too fast, when the fire struggled to stay alive, when travelers wandered off in confusion. Each story becomes a warning, each warning becomes practice, and practice becomes survival. For travelers outside that lineage, learning begins with humility. Accepting that the desert teaches slowly and punishes quickly is the first step toward navigating it safely. The second step is repetition, practicing fire building, practicing layering clothing, practicing choosing shelter, and practicing recognizing shifts in one's own body. Each rehearsal builds a layer of instinct, and instinct is what remains when the cold begins to weaken thought. In many cases, survival is simply the ability to act without needing time to think. Those who must analyze every decision quickly fall behind the desert's pace, but those who have practiced enough produce responses smoothly, adjusting to conditions as though guided by an internal map. Under freezing temperatures, this fluidity becomes essential. Hesitation allows the cold to slip deeper. Practiced motion keeps it at bay. It is often said that the desert rewards those who respect it. That respect manifests through preparation, through repetition, through accepting that nothing in this environment is gentle. The cold does not forgive inexperience. It does not pause for learning, nor does it allow trial and error. It acts while the unprepared hesitate. And in that space between knowledge and uncertainty, the desert decides outcomes. Stories of survival often highlight small moments: someone who wrapped their feet a little earlier, someone who rebuilt a fire before it weakened, someone who adjusted their shelter based on a shift in the air. These moments did not arise from luck. They came from knowing what to notice and when to respond. Such awareness is the product of years, not instincts born overnight. To enter the Sahara without practice skills is to trust one's life to hope rather than preparation. The cold strips away illusions, revealing how thin the line is between endurance and collapse. Those who have lived in the desert understand that survival is not dramatic. It is steady, repeated, deliberate. It is built on countless small actions performed correctly long before they are needed. Experience becomes its own form of protection when the desert tests those who enter its silence. What follows this understanding depends on how deeply each skill has been learned before the cold begins to unveil its demands. Inside that long accumulation of practice rests the truth that survival is shaped by repetition, not chance. Each night in the Sahara rearranges itself in ways that resist prediction, making even the most experienced travelers pause before assuming they understand what lies ahead. The desert does not repeat its patterns. A night that begins with calm air may end with a wind that drops the temperature so sharply that breath becomes difficult. A sky that appears stable may shift within minutes, carrying colder currents from unseen distances. Nothing about these hours can be taken for granted, and those who try to rely on memories of previous nights often discover how quickly the desert punishes familiarity. The wind is often the first sign that something has changed. Even a slight movement of air can alter the temperature dramatically, stripping heat from exposed skin at a pace the body cannot match. A night that might have been merely uncomfortable transforms into one that cuts through clothing and stiffens the hands. Experienced nomads measure this shift not by sound or sand movement, but by the weight of the air on their faces. A stronger gust can reduce the temperature by 10 degrees or more, turning survival into a far more demanding process than anticipated. A night without fire reveals another side of the desert's nature. Fire is not only a source of warmth, it is a stabilizing force, something the mind depends on to maintain clarity. Without it, the darkness grows heavier, pressing inward until the boundary between the self and the surrounding emptiness becomes difficult to distinguish. The cold deepens faster than expected, and tasks that were simple before sunset, adjusting a blanket, finding an extra layer, and securing shelter, become harder to perform. The absence of flame leaves travelers exposed in ways they rarely anticipate during the day. When the sun hides how rapidly the desert can drain warmth, preparation determines everything. A night approached with confidence, but insufficient planning can quickly turn into one that tests every remaining reserve of strength. The desert allows little room for correction once the temperature begins its steep descent. Layers forgotten in a pack, a fire built too small a campsite chosen without regard for wind paths. Each oversight grows more dangerous as the hours pass. Travelers who lack the discipline to prepare fully often learn the consequences in the hardest possible way, discovering that a single mistake can unravel their efforts entirely. Even those who believe they understand the desert are forced to adapt repeatedly. They read small cues, the way sand cools under their feet, the movement of their own breath in the air, the silence that settles differently when the temperature begins to fall. These observations guide their decisions, helping them correct their course before the cold becomes overwhelming. But no amount of experience makes the nights predictable. What they gain instead is readiness, an acceptance that the desert does not repeat itself, and therefore neither should they. Unpredictability shapes the mental strain of these nights. A traveler who has endured several mild evenings may grow complacent, lowering their guard or convincing themselves they have learned enough. When the harsh night eventually arrives, its intensity feels multiplied by the false sense of security built from earlier experiences. This psychological shift can be as dangerous as the temperature itself. The desert uses expectation against those who carry it, turning certainty into vulnerability. The terrain contributes to this variability. Valleys hold warmth differently from open dunes. Rocky areas release heat at a different pace than sand. Even a small elevation change can alter the night's character. A traveler who slept comfortably one night may find themselves freezing the next, simply because they moved a short distance without considering how the ground changes. The desert rearranges its rules with each horizon, forcing adaptation not as a choice but as a requirement. Experienced nomads often say that the desert grants no patterns, only lessons. Each night teaches something new: how wind behaves when stars shift position, how sand cools after an unusually hot day, how the body responds when exhaustion sets in earlier than expected. These lessons accumulate not in a predictable sequence, but as fragments, each adding to the understanding that survival is not a routine. It is an ongoing negotiation with conditions that refuse to stay constant. This truth becomes more apparent when the cold deepens. The body responds differently depending on what came before: fatigue from travel, lack of food, minor dehydration, or even emotional strain. A traveler who endured one difficult night may find themselves weaker during the next, unable to rely on the same strategies. In the Sahara, the night interacts with the traveler's internal state as much as with the environment. The cold changes because the person changes, and the person changes because the cold does not remain still. What binds all of these experiences together is the reality that no night allows assumptions. Those who prepare for only one set of conditions expose themselves to danger when the desert shifts its tone. Those who assume mild temperatures will continue may face wind they cannot withstand. Those who believe their fire will last may discover that the sand absorbs heat faster than expected. Nothing repeats, and nothing stays loyal to expectation. To survive, travelers must approach each night as if it were entirely new. They must rebuild their fire with care, check their clothing with patience, choose their shelter with attention to detail, and remain alert even when exhaustion urges them to rest. It is not the desert's violence that makes its nights dangerous, but its inconsistency. A mild dusk can hide a brutal midnight, and a calm evening can transform into one that erases strength hour by hour. A desert night changes its character without warning, demanding preparation that does not rely on yesterday's conditions. What unfolds after this realization depends on whether the traveler meets each night as a new challenge. Within this shifting landscape lies the understanding that survival requires constant adjustment rather than trust in routine. A person standing at the edge of the Sahara, at the moment the last stripe of sunlight sinks behind the dunes, might feel a calm that seems almost gentle. The sand cools in slow waves, the sky deepens into layered blues, and the wind fades until the world feels harmless. Yet, this quiet is the beginning of the desert's final lesson. Throughout every journey across its wide, unforgiving expanse, one truth waits patiently to be understood. The night is not absence. It is a force in itself demanding respect from anyone who enters its reach. Those who suffer in the Sahara rarely fall because of dramatic storms or sudden disasters. More often they fall because they treat the stillness casually. Confidence becomes a quiet liability, growing in the spaces where caution should live. A traveler may believe that tonight will follow the same pattern as the previous night. Cool, predictable, familiar. They may trust memory more than awareness, assuming the desert behaves like a place with rules. But the Sahara does not repeat itself, and a calm horizon is never a guarantee. The danger lies in believing that nothing harmful can happen under a flawless sky. The stars seem steady, patient, and reassuring. They cling to the edges of the darkness, as though offering comfort. But below them lies a landscape that shows no hesitation. The sand that felt gentle under bare feet at dusk becomes a cold reservoir by midnight, pulling warmth from the body without pause. The wind that seemed soft hours earlier returns sharper, cutting through layers with precision. These shifts do not arrive with drama or threat. They move silently, and by the time they are felt clearly, the body may already be losing its ability to recover. Preparation becomes a form of respect rather than fear. Entering a desert night without proper layers, without a ready source of heat, without attention to shelter, is an act of misplaced trust. Survival is rarely a matter of bravery, it is almost always a matter of readiness. Those who endure speak of checking their clothing twice, placing every item within reach, choosing the exact spot where they sleep, and preparing long before the danger becomes visible. Strength alone cannot defend against the cold, but preparation can. By contrast, the ones who fail often do so because they imagine themselves beyond the reach of chance. They believe that the desert cannot break them in a single night, that the cold will not reach them, that their determination is protection enough. This confidence leaves them exposed. The Sahara does not need force to defeat such a traveler, only time. Warmth fades, clarity weakens, and mistakes begin to collect. A missed layer, a neglected fire, a moment of hesitation. These small slips move a traveler step by step toward a silent end. Still, the desert does not teach with cruelty. It teaches with consistency. Every night becomes a reminder, every misjudgment, a lesson, every survival, a demonstration of what must be done again. Those who listen find themselves changing. They move more carefully, observe more patiently, and prepare more fully. They accept that survival is not a matter of conquering the desert, but of cooperating with it, responding to its silence with deliberate care. This honesty is what makes the Sahara compelling. It has no illusions. It does not disguise its dangers, nor does it pretend to be generous. It simply exists, shaped by heat, wind, and darkness. Yet many travelers impose their own illusions on it, seeing beauty as gentleness, stillness, as safety stars, as protection. The final lesson of the desert is not meant to frighten. It is meant to clarify. The night must be respected because it will not change for anyone. As this journey through the desert's cold truths reaches its end, the image of a traveler preparing for the night becomes symbolic. The gathering of layers, the careful arrangement of shelter, the tending of a fire, the calming of the mind, these actions reflect something larger than survival. They reflect the discipline of facing reality without distortion. They reflect the readiness required in any difficult part of life. They reflect the understanding that danger rarely announces itself loudly. It appears in small, quiet increments, the way cold builds beneath a starlit sky. There is a simple dignity in acknowledging one's limits. The desert night rewards this honesty. It gives space to those who act with humility and takes from those who treat it casually. The final teaching of the Sahara is straightforward, and unwavering silence is not safety. Beauty is not protection. A night that appears soft can turn sharp, and a traveler who fails to prepare stands alone against a force that does not negotiate. Imagine now, as this chapter closes, standing again beneath that enormous sky. The stars remain as steady as before, unbothered by the shifting cold rolling across the dunes. The sand stretches outward like a sleeping ocean. The air cools in slow, precise layers, each one carrying the memory of countless nights that have come before. And in this moment, one final understanding settles quietly. Survival is never dramatic. It is thoughtful. It is patient. It is built from dozens of small choices made long before danger arrives. The wind begins to soften, settling into its long pause before the deepest part of the night. The lessons have been gathered, the warnings spoken, the paths illuminated. Nothing more is required of you now. Let your breath slow. Let your thoughts loosen. Let the desert's weight fall away, leaving only the calm that settles after understanding is complete. Tonight, there is no cold waiting for you. Tonight, there is no wind rising. Tonight, nothing in the darkness is reaching for you. Tonight, you may rest. Good night.